Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations with another design team project for Bramble Fox. Today I'm going to be creating a layout with an upcoming September Foxbox perspective and wedding paper snips, and I'm going to share how I create a hexagon background on a layout with florals. This photo was taken on the night our daughter was proposed to, so I want to make sure I record this memory for her. I'm going to be using this Priceless moment perspective that will be arriving in the September Foxbox, along with these wedding paper snips. The acrylic title is a lovely shade of sage, so I've gathered some papers and ephemera from Cocoa Vanilla for this layout. I'm also going to be adding a floral die cut to the page, and I'll show you how I add color to that with Distress Oxide sprays. I am going to start with that flower first because it's going to need some time to dry, and I want to get that out of the way. I've used a layered die from my collection to cut out petals for these flowers, and I've cut it from mixed media paper. The roses in the photo are a deeper shade of yellow with pink tips, so I'm going to try to replicate this with a few different sprays. Instead of spraying directly onto the die cuts, I'm going to spray onto my glass board, then dip the die cuts into the color. This is going to give me a little more control and create a more saturated color. I am using tweezers to pick up the petals and place them or drag them in the ink, and I'm also transferring excess pigment to other petals. Now, if I weren't doing this video, I would probably just pick them up with my hands, but I try not to get too messy in videos, so I'm using the tweezers today. I've started with mustard seed, and now I'm bringing in wild honey, which is a little bit darker. Again, I'm just going to drag each of the petals into the color and add an intense amount of pigment to the petals. I'm going to spray the tops of the petals with saltwater taffy. I want this color to be less intense with some white showing through, so I'm going to spray them instead of dragging them through the pigment. I'm also going to come in with some picked raspberry and add some bright pink to the tips, and I ended up adding way too much color, but that's okay. I'm going to show you how to fix that in a moment. After drying these with my heat tool, that color was a little bit more intense than I wanted it to be. So I'm spraying water over the pieces, and then I'm going to dab it with a paper towel. You're going to see the pigment intensify when the water hits it. That's because the ink is water reactive. If I had left the water there, droplet patterns would form. Now I'm using this so that I can remove some of the pigment. So I'm going to lay some paper towel on top of the die cuts. Now at this point I realized that I probably should have just grabbed some cardstock to remove the ink, because this would have made a really cool pattern for a background. I'm going to do one more thing to these petals before I set them aside to dry. As you know, I love adding texture to my pages, so I'm going to wrinkle these petals. I've placed the die cuts onto a paper towel and I'm spraying them with some water. Then I'm going to crinkle them up in the towel to add the wrinkles to the petals. The paper towel helps protect some of the details of those petals from tearing, and it absorbs the excess water. I don't know that I would recommend this with standard cardstock because it might tear. I'm using a thicker mixed media paper, which is sturdier, but I'm still being cautious with those details on the petals. You can see here that after they've been removed from the towel, there's a great texture on them. All right, I'm going to set these aside so that they dry completely, and I'm going to start working on the background for my page. I have selected this printed background for my layout because it already has some lovely washed colors around the edges. I'm going to be layering hexagon shapes behind my photo, so I've used a stitch die to cut them out. You could also do this on a cutting machine if you wish. I have selected a mix of patterns from the papers and the cut apart page to create the hexagon shapes. I want this to be a simple background that doesn't distract from the photo. The only bit of color in this photo are the roses, so I want to make sure I bring out some of that color because it's an important part of the story. For the photo, I have already backed it on white cardstock, and I'm going to frame it with a wood grain. The wood grain matches the feel of the ranch party they were at, and it's going to make the photo stand out on the page. To make this rectangle look more like a wood frame, I'm going to fold it on the diagonal. This paper is pretty thick, so I'm going to score it first, and then I'll fold it along those score lines. I'm going to use a blending tool to add some ink to the folded edges. The corners are what need it the most because that's what's going to show behind the photo. After I have added ink to the diagonals, I'm going to add ink along the sides of the frame. Once the photo is placed on top, it looks like a picture frame. Those little corners that I inked almost look like miter cuts in the corner of a frame. Before I place the hexagons down, I'm going to use my scissors to rough up the edges of the corners. If you want a more distressed look, you could add some ink. I am going to bring in my T-square here to make sure that I'm keeping all of the hexagons straight across the page. The very last hexagon is going to be popped up on some foam tape and trimmed so it goes off the edge. This last hexagon was cut from that cut apart page because I wanted to have a little phrase on it, and it also has some floral patterns which are going to match the other florals. Across the page, I'm going to place this gray wooden heart border. The gray matches the elements in the photo, and it's going to draw your eye to that picture. Before I tack this down, I do want to add a little bit of stitching to it. After I added the stitching, I used double-sided tape to put this in place and a T-ruler to help me keep it straight. Behind my photo, I have added a pocket for the story. I do this often when I don't want to share the story online or if I just want to keep the layout cleaner without any handwriting. You can make these pockets or use a die. Now I'm going to start laying out my florals for this page. The rose was assembled using the instructions that came with the die set, and you can see it's a very full flower. I did add some thinner foam tape between the layers, but you can skip the foam tape if you want a flatter rose. It did turn out a little more peach than yellow, but it does go well with the colors on the page, and it still references the roses she received. As I'm laying these down onto the page, I'm trying to create visual triangles with the colors and patterns of the flowers and leaves and hexagons. This collection has a large amount of florals, and each one has a different petal shape. In my embellishment clusters, I'm trying to use different flower shapes also, which will add some contrast to the space. At this point, I have most of the items in the location where I want them to go, so I'm going to start tacking a few of them in place. Before I adhere them down, I'm going to run my fingernail or scissors along the edges to give them the same look as some of the elements on the page. I'm also going to be using foam tape of different thicknesses to add dimensions so that they balance out the roses. Like I said, the roses are an important part of the story. We were not at the event, but we did get an account of what happened. Throughout the night, people at the ranch party were bringing my daughter individual roses. She knew that her boyfriend was up to something, but she said she had no idea what was about to happen. As the last rose arrived, he got down on one knee and proposed. Now there's more to the story, but I'll add that to my journal card. So I have skipped ahead here because you did not need to see all of the flowers being put into place. The only item I don't have adhered in place are those leaves at the base because I'm not sure if I want to keep them gray or use a set of green leaves or if I'm just going to remove them from the page. Before I add any more to this layout, I want to get the title and journaling tab in place so that I can visually see what colors need added to the page. The tab on my journal card matches the bluish flowers, so that created a nice triangle of color there, and the title matches the green leaves. I do want to add a little bit more to the title, so I'm going to bring a sticker that says "Together is the best place to be," and a little blue banner that says "Love." I'm also going to layer a little green banner here with a heart. So now I've added almost all of the colors from this layout in the area where the title's placed. I have two little faux tags here that I want to pop behind the Story tab. I'm going to glue on some little pieces to these to bring some more of the other colors to these tags, and then I'm going to tuck them into place. These patterns and colors are the same ones that I've added to the title and in the hexagons, so they're going to create a nice diagonal flow from the title to the photo. At this point, I've decided that that leaf at the bottom needs to go. It doesn't really fit with the flow of the layout, and it's just kind of floating on its own. I do want to add something to the upper left corner. I have this little "she said yes" phrase from the paper snips, and I'm going to attach it to the clipboard topper from the September Foxbox bundle. I'm also going to add a few little floral elements here to the cluster. What's an engagement page without a few hearts? So I'm going to bring in a few white heart perspectives to the page, and then I'm going to add a few of the puffy heart stickers. These puffies are super small, so I did need to use a tool to get them where they needed to be. I'm going to finish adding the hearts and other items to the page, and then I'll show you the finished layout. Off camera, I added a little bit of gray splatter to the page to match some of the other gray items in the background. And I added a butterfly. This is the same color as the rose, and it brought some of that color over to this side of the page. I love all the layers and texture on this layout. The colors help the roses in the photo stand out, and the little bits of wood grain gave reference to the ranch party they were at. The title and the clipboard from the September Foxbox paired well with that little paper snip and the hearts and gave this page just what it needed. The color of the rose didn't quite turn out as I envisioned, but it goes well with the other elements on the page and helps to tell the story. I love how the Distress Oxides gave it that chalk-like look and how the wrinkles give it a realistic feel. On this layout, I tucked my journaling behind the photo and used a little tab and some faux tags to show where to find it. Thank you for joining me for another scrapbook project. If you would like to see more of my projects, you can visit my channel or follow Miss Carrie's Creations online. If you have any questions about this project or the supplies I used, feel free to comment below. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.